We have some controversial things to talk about today. So just in case, I'm packed and ready to go. We'll see. By the way, every once in a while you'll notice a new praise team member. Today we had Corey Ann. Some of you met her. Yeah. Round of applause for Corey Ann. Some of you met, well, they've been here a while, but some of you met her last week at the women's ministry painting event, Paint With Me. That's what she actually does for a living, is she, and correct me if I say something wrong about this, but you go to weddings and you paint the couple, generally. Yeah. So, yeah, a picture of the couple. Yeah. That's a very good distinction. That would be, these millennials, you just don't know what Gen Z, what they're doing. Yeah. If you're interested in being part of the praise team, we have ways to do that. That QR code can get you involved in a lot of areas, and one of them is praise team. And I know that's not something everybody wants to do. Some of you are like, I don't even want to step foot on stage, much less sing in front of anybody. And I get that. There's other ways to serve too. Just scan that QR code. You'll find it out. One of the things that you've probably seen, it's on the doorways, it's been on the website, it's just in a variety of places, is our mission statement as a church. This is relatively new to us, although the spirit of it we've been doing for years and years, but the phrasing of it, the mission of our church, of Woodbury Church of Christ, is to help everyone take their next step closer to Jesus. That's the whole goal. So when we have church, our goal for you, we pray about this, we think about this, we plan this, is that when you come into church, you're one way, but you're at least stepping closer to Jesus in some way. Whether it's just an inch, just a little bit more ready to receive him, to learn about him, to know him, just anything. And it doesn't have to be tremendous, but that's great. If it's a lot, that's wonderful too. But just a little bit. And that's the mission of our church. And we're going to get back into that in just a little bit. We are in the Gospel of Luke, the book of Luke. It's the third book of your New Testament. It's the third time this story has been told of Jesus' life and what happened. And so by this point, if you're caught up with the reading, which I don't presume you are, just keep at it. But by this point, you've read some of these stories several times. You may have noticed differences and details, but there's a lot of similar information. And it's just interesting to me that God was like, I need people to read this and then read it again and read it again and then read it again. Because what you're going to discover through that process is that you are a different person every time you engage with the story of Jesus, and you learn different things. Even just this morning, something that I was tempted to skim over in the reading for today, I was like, no, I can't do that. I'm the guy on stage. I got to set a good example. And so I sat down, read it, and I was blown away just by this aspect of what I was reading that I hadn't noticed before. It's so valuable that we dig into what God has given us in the story of Jesus. Now, Luke, the author, he is a lot like us. He never met Jesus. He never laid eyes on Jesus. He never heard Jesus speak. He heard people who had been transformed by Jesus, who came to him and shared that message with him. He's a lot like us. And he, a lot like us, he was very Western in this thinking. He's kind of a documentarian. Like, I love a good documentary. I love watching a good documentary. I don't know if anybody else is like The Last Dance, the documentary of the 6 Chicago Bulls rings. Man, that was so good. I mean, I knew who was going to win every game, and I'm on the edge of my seat like, who's going to win it? Well, of course the Bulls are going to win it. That's the whole thing. Or any of those nature documentaries with like Richard Attenborough narrating. It's just so good. Yeah, what does a muskrat do at night? I'm fascinated. I want to know. Crime documentaries, those are guilty pleasure, but they're pretty interesting too. So Luke is a documentarian. He set up interviews with people. He interviewed people. He collected information. He asked the right questions. There's evidence that Luke, even though he had never met Jesus, actually interviewed Jesus' mother to get the story from her perspective. There's evidence within the story of Luke about that. That's pretty fascinating to me. So he pieces all these things together into this one cohesive narrative. And he wants you to pay attention. And this is valuable. This is important for us to know as we read these stories. He wants us to pay attention to certain aspects of the story. So he could tell us everything, but he's drawing our attention to specific characters. He wants us to see that character for some reason. It's not just, hey, here is a thing that happened. Here is a thing that happened, and I want you to know about it for a purpose. And that's valuable for us to enter into the text with that in mind. He wants us to pay attention. It's not just a report on the life of Jesus. He's saying, did you notice this? Did you see this? On a recent flight I was on, it was Spirit Airlines, and that matters, I suppose. There was we were in the very front seat in economy. So just a few rows in, you could get bigger seats and then you could get these seats. And it was my wife and I. We were in the very front row seat, and there was a medical event on the plane. I had never been on an airplane where this happened. Our flight had been delayed already, and I felt so guilty because part of me was like, please don't be a serious medical event because I don't want to land somewhere and have it even later. And I know it's super selfish and terrible. But what had happened is a lady, a row behind us on the other side of the aisle, had gotten up, started heading to the restroom, and she was sort of stumbling. And I thought, well, maybe she's just struggling with, a little bit of the turbulence on the plane. And then she passed out right at the front of the plane. So everybody on the plane can see what's happening. Of course, the flight attendants rush, they triage, they have protocols for all this. And then the flight attendant did that thing. I've never been on a plane where this happened, where she got on the PA and she said, are there any medical professionals on the plane? And I thought it was interesting that she didn't say, are there any doctors on the plane? But she probably was like, this is Spirit Airlines. They're not on Spirit Airlines. So I'm sure that, I think I heard that joke somewhere else before, but I thought that was pretty interesting. The guy right in front of us, this was a very local situation. The guy right in front of us was an EMT. So he got up, he helped her. Everybody on the plane, I presume, at least I was, me and Kareen we're like, what is happening? We don't want to be like rubbernecking, but you totally want to know what's going on. Is she okay? What kind of event is she having? So we're like, everybody's doing this in the seat, except for one person. There was one person on that plane that was not paying attention to this medical event. Nope, she was passed out, so she was not paying attention to anything. There was one person, he is sitting in the row with her. The flight attendant went back to that row and said, sir, are you her husband? He said, yes. This guy did not get up to check on her. He sat in his seat the whole time. This is Spirit, there's no seat back screen where you can watch a movie. He doesn't have a phone. He just sat there. I was like looking at him like, if that was a family member of mine, I would be up there trying to figure out what's going on. He didn't move. He didn't crane his neck. He was not interested at all, which makes me wonder. Like either he knows his wife very well and he's like, she does this all the time. She's fine. Just give her a second. She'll get back up in a minute. Or he did something. Either way, we need a documentary about the least curious guy in the world. I've never seen anything like that. Now, the lady was fine. She passed out. She hadn't eaten or something like that. And the flight attendants helped her back up and sat her back in her seat. And I saw the two of them talking, but it wasn't like, are you okay? Or it was just talking. Like what? And this is the craziest thing that I have ever seen. I've never seen a person less curious in my life about something that was happening to somebody that they were married to. It was pretty wild. Now, I tell you that story because the story we're exploring today in the Gospels is full of very strange reactions we should be curious about. And sometimes we approach the Bible with a lack of curiosity that's frankly alarming. We should be curious about what's happening in these stories and asking ourselves questions. Why is Luke mentioning that? Why did Jesus do that? Why did Peter respond that way? We need to be curious about this stuff. And the story we're looking at today is the only place this particular interaction is recorded. So it's kind of important. It's kind of unique to Luke. Have you ever heard of the phrase beige flag? You've heard of the red flag. Like in a relationship, if you got a friend who's in a dating relationship and the person that they're interested in is doing some crazy things, you're like, oh, those are red flags, right? There's even a new thing, the green flag. That means like that's a good quality. The beige flag is a strange, like a quirk or an eccentricity that this person has. It doesn't mean they're bad and it doesn't mean they're good. It's just a strange thing that this person does. Your spouse has some beige flags, I'm sure. You were like, yeah, that's my wife. She passes out in Spirit Airlines every once in a while. I don't know. It's not a bad thing. My spouse has some beige flags. There's just weird things she does. They're just weird that I didn't know other humans did, but maybe there's a community of like-minded people. There's just strange things. I have none. I'm pretty normal. So a beige flag is just a weird thing, not bad, not good, but a weird thing that a person does. So what we want to do in this story today is look at several beige flags in this story. Because sometimes we make the mistake of dismissing the weirdness of the Bible. The Bible is an old book, it's weird, whatever. But I believe we grow spiritually as followers of Jesus when we are fascinated and captivated by Jesus. And I believe we stagnate when we just don't really care. I think one of the clearest signs of a life that's being transformed is whether or not a person is captivated by Jesus. You can interact with a human, and if they are fascinated and captivated and curious and interested in the person of Jesus, that is a good sign. If they're like, I kind of haven't figured out, that is a bad sign. And there are a lot of Christians and a lot of churches that think they've got Jesus figured out. That is a red flag. That is a bad sign. There's a wonderful verse to this effect that we're not going to really dig into, but I just wanted to draw your attention to it. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. Paul's just writing, and we all who with unveiled faces, referencing Moses and his unveiled face, contemplate the Lord's glory. We are being transformed in his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. When we contemplate the Lord's glory, we are transformed. When you are curious about the person of Jesus, you are transformed. It's a wonderful, wonderful truth, wonderful idea. So here's what I want you to do. We're going to look at this one specific story that has about 4 strange elements in it, and we're going to explore each of those. I want you to imagine you're on a hillside in Galilee, and the hill slopes down to the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is not very big. Lake Mille Lacs is about 3 times bigger than the Sea of Galilee. So if that helps you conceptualize it. It's a lake. We call it a sea, but it's a lake. And because there's not a lot of wind activity, it's a rocky shore. It's not sand like you would imagine. It's not a beach. Here's an actual picture of the Sea of Galilee. This story takes place just outside of this town called Capernaum. And it's a town of about 1,500 people, small town. A lot of you grew up in small towns, town of about 1,500 people. Outside the town is, if you were walking by, you would have seen a crowd, maybe 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people. So multiple times bigger than the town itself is a crowd outside of the town. And if you got closer, you would have seen that the crowd had all their attention centered on one person who was right near the edge of the shore. Maybe so much so that he was actually stepping into the water a little bit. The crowd, in fact, was pressing up against him. It wouldn't have been like at a concert where you have the fence and you have security and the elevated stage and then you have somebody speaking from the stage or performing from the stage. It wasn't like that at all. The crowd would have been right up against this person. And as you got closer, you could see this person like, this is too much. And in the narrative of the story, they notice nearby there's some boats pulled up, and they walk over to those boats, tell the fishermen to pull out just a little bit, and then they begin to teach from the boats to the crowd. Luke chapter 5, verse 1. Now it happened that while the crowd was pressing around him, they're just right up next to each other. It's like getting out of U.S. Bank Stadium after a game where you're just like shoulder to shoulder people. And listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. That's just another way of saying Galilee. That's actually the non-Hebrew way of saying Galilee, which is a little signal to us about the audience Luke was expecting to read the book. Verse 2, and he saw 2 boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats. You can imagine the fishermen were like, okay, that's strange. Which was Simon's. Now, we'll learn that Simon is going to be given a nickname Peter, but this is the Peter that we know of Peter fame. And he asked him to put out a little distance from land, and he sat down and he continued teaching the crowds from the boat. Fun fact, you probably know this. that sound carries better across water. So he's got the crowd, he's out on the boat, and he's teaching them. And he's teaching them the things you would expect that you've read in the Gospels. He's teaching them, hey, don't think you're cool because you love family and friends. Real, true love, deep down in the core kind of love, is a love that loves one's enemies. It's that kind of stuff. And people were fascinated by what he was teaching. They were amazed by what he was teaching. So he teaches them. And then here's our first beige flag. Here's weird move number one. Weird move number one, fishing after hours. Luke chapter 5, verse 4. Now when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out in the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon responded and said, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing, but I will do as you say and let down the nets." Now, I'm not a fishing guy. I'm not into fishing. My very first experience with fishing, I was with a friend. I was probably 8 years old, and I was getting something ready behind my friend, and he went back to cast, and he caught me and didn't know he caught me, so he's doing this, and I've got a hook in my hand, and I cannot scream because I'm so like, I'm going to lose my hand. I'm freaking out a little bit. That was my first and really only experience with fishing. Kind of soured me on the whole endeavor. Some of you are like, but Patrick, being up at 4 a.m. on a lake, on the water, it's calm, nobody's around, it's the greatest. No, you know what's the greatest at 4 a.m.? Yeah, sleeping, yes. So Peter is cleaning the nets. This is the end of the shift. They've been working all night. He's putting things away. And Jesus is asking him to undo all that work. Parents, you remember when you had, I guess for me, some of you are there now, when you had toddlers and you got a surprise March snowstorm and you had already put away all the winter stuff thinking, we're done, no big deal. And then you get this 12 inches of snow and your toddler's like, I need to go outside and play. And you go in the garage and you dig out the snow stuff and you get them dressed and you have to squeeze, all their limbs into the different gloves and everything. And you finally get them all snug and everything zipped up and you send them outside to enjoy the snow. You've had this happen. You send them outside and they look outside and it's beautiful and they look up at you and they say, I have to go to the bathroom. And you're like, I'll just wash that stuff later. Just go. I don't want to undo. Nobody else do that? I don't want to undo all that work. That was a lot of work to get you ready. On top of that, it is pretty annoying to have someone who doesn't regularly do your job tell you how to do your job. Have you ever had that happen? It's a little annoying. Have you ever considered preaching better, Patrick? What? I hadn't thought about that. That's a great idea. I'll write that down. But you've had it happen. What if I came into your office and I'm like, hey, have you heard of this thing called Excel? It's amazing. You should really look into it. And you're like, come on, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. Jesus, you're fine. You're into theology. You're a teacher, but you're not a fisherman. And in fact, this is kind of interesting in the story. I'm speculating a little bit here, but Jesus uses a completely different set of words to describe fishing than what Peter responds to him with, which leads me to believe that Jesus wasn't maybe using the right vernacular. Have you ever had that happen? Every industry has its own jargon, and you can kind of tell who's an insider and who's an outsider by the language they use. Or have you ever gone to the coffee shop and you're like, I want to order that thing. It looks pretty cool, but I don't know how to pronounce it. And you get up to the front and you say to the barista, you say, can I have a cortada? And they roll their eyes at you and say, do you mean cortado? And you're like, whatever, just make me the coffee. Because there's insider language. And it looks maybe potentially like Jesus wasn't using the right language to describe what was happening. And this is totally me. Okay, please dismiss this because I'm not an expert. It looks like Peter responds using Jesus' language. So in this text, this is just fun for me. I think it's interesting. Let down your nets for a catch, Jesus says. That's not fishing vernacular. Simon responded with fishing vernacular, Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. Different word, catch and caught, different word. But I will do as you say and let down the nets. I get the impression that Peter's like repeating the wrong language back in him. I get the impression that Peter's a little hesitant, don't you? Peter's not into this. This is not something that he wants to do. He's not a willing participant so far. He's less than enthusiastic, but he doesn't. Verse 6, and when they had done this, they got a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to tear, so that they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And as they came and filled both of the boats to the point that they were sinking. Now, these guys are not rich guys. This is not a get-rich industry. This is a big deal, what has just happened. This is a big deal. We don't know. We're not sure like to what degree this is, but it's orders of magnitude more than they would have made in a night, maybe than they would have made in a month, potentially. Sinking boats, of course, that would have been bad, but potentially it would have been like in the middle of your work year, your boss says, hey, let me give you a bonus, and the bonus is equal to your year's wages. Like, that would have been great, right? You would have been like, this is the best day of my life. This is awesome. What a blessing. And your wife would have said, well, what about when your children were born? Like, well, I don't know. It's pretty up there. There are so many examples of abundance in these stories in the gospel. So many examples of abundance. And I think we don't realize to what degree you and I operate out of the scarcity mentality. We just view the world from that scarcity mentality. There's only so much pie, and I got to grab the biggest piece that I can, because if I don't, somebody else is going to. And we just think that way. We don't even stop and think that we're thinking that way. We just do. It's part of our, our default wiring. There's only so much to go around. And I think that fear, and this is a little preachy, sorry, I think that fear drives our political point of view. And we feel like we've got to fight others because there's only so much. God is only provided a little bit. And if I don't grab what I want and for me and my family and exclude other people, then I'm out. I'm going to be on the outside. And it just shows that we do not trust God to provide in abundance. That's the bottom line. It's a fear. And if we truly, deeply had faith in God, we would understand that we don't have to kick anybody. We don't have to exclude anybody in order for God to provide for us. Isn't that what Jesus said over and over and over and over and over? And here we are 2,000 years later, having read these stories over and over and over, and we're still like, I got to get mine. If I don't get mine, somebody else is going to get it. It's so wrong. Anyway, a little preachy. Sorry. I'm not sorry. All right, so this story is interesting. But what is actually happening? Like, okay, great. That's awesome that there's this big catch of fish. That's cool. Cool for Peter, I guess. That's great. But what is it really telling me? So what if Jesus knows where the fish are biting? That is not a feature I'm looking for in my spiritual guru, in my spiritual leader. You probably don't care if I know where the fish are. You're just like, can you preach or not preach, Patrick? I don't care what happens when you're fishing on the weekend, which, as you already know, I don't. But imagine this. Just imagine this. A guy who doesn't fish. He doesn't watch the Fishing Channel. He doesn't read the Fishing Digest. I don't know if that's a magazine. He just guided them to the greatest catch of fish that anyone has ever seen. A guy that knows nothing about fishing. What should they conclude about that guy? What should they think about that guy that acted like the highest achievement in their field of work is just, I can do that, snap of a finger, no big deal. Imagine, I don't know if this is a good comparison or not, but imagine Jesus went up to Paul McCartney with some sheet music and said, here you go, here's the greatest song ever written. People will not remember Hey Jude or Penny Lane or Yesterday once they hear this song. And he had never written a song before. And he had never sung before. You'd be like, this thing that I worked so hard for, that I strive for, that I claw for, and it just comes to you with ease. What does that say about that person? What does that say about that person? Michelangelo, I've never picked up a paintbrush, but here's a little something better than the Sistine Chapel. And it's not the abundance, and this is important. It's not the abundance, it's not the skill, it's that Jesus is the source of all abundance, which is why we see Peter do what he does next. If this is just a cool miracle that's going to make Peter a lot of money, what Peter does next does not make sense. But Peter recognizes something that we may miss. Luke chapter 5, verse 8. Most of us, I think we'd be overjoyed by the catch of fish, but Peter does something different. Verse 8. Luke 5, verse 8, sorry. But when Simon Peter saw this, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord. Go away from me, Master, for I am a sinful man." What? What does fishing have to do with sin? What does fishing have to do with sin? Nothing, unless Peter is catching a glimpse of something that he has not seen before. Sin is a pretty outmoded concept, but I think it's actually a lot more relatable. The language of sin is not language that we hear a lot. You're not going to hear that in a job review. They're not going to pull you in for your yearly review and say, you missed some deadlines, you sinner. It's just not it's not language we use, but I think it's pretty relatable. Peter is not saying to Jesus, "Get away from me, Master, I cheat on my taxes," and say bad words. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, "I'm a sinful man." Now, Peter may have cheated on his taxes and said bad words, but that's not what he's trying to capture. Sin, this is important, church. Sin is a life that is out of sync with what is truly good. Sin is a life that is out of sync with what is truly good. I don't mean just morally good, though that's certainly part of it. I mean God's ultimate conception of good, of a whole, of a fulfilling kind of life. Like Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12. There is a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof is death. They're living out of sync with God's definition of what is truly good. James 4, verse 7. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin. Because God, of course, is the only person that is capable of defining what is truly good. Which leads me to the suitcase, obviously, right? How many of you in here would admit that you're overpackers? Yeah, okay, 4 or 5 of us, really? Any of you underpackers? Do you ever get should have packed more undies? No? Really? I'm definitely an overpacker. I mean, it's not bad, but I just want to be really prepared. Stuff things in here. But let's say God has been on this trip before, and he gives us the packing list. And he says, here's what you need, and here's what you do not need. Here's what you should bring with you, and here's what you should not bring with you, right? Just imagine that approach. So you have the normal stuff, like, I'm going to a warm place. I'm gonna bring some shorts, right? Let's see. I found this jacket. It was on clearance a while back, and I've never worn it once, and I didn't check the size before I bought it, but who knows? Maybe there will be an occasion on this trip where I will be like, I wish I had brought that jacket. It's so shiny. Or how about this? I don't want to admit this, but I'm going to. Do any of you have aspirational pants? You know what that is? It's like pants you don't fit into, but you think maybe someday. Maybe this trip will be the day. If I don't eat for the first half of the trip, maybe I will fit into my aspirational pants. I've never worn them before, but maybe this trip is the trip. And then, you know what? I don't know. Who knows? What if the place you go to has a record player? And you're just like, what if I'm feeling Arlo Guthrie on this trip and I need to listen to a few records? Yeah, just stuff you would never think of, stuff you would never do at home. Or if you're, maybe you're Travis and you're like, well, I'm going to be working on this trip. Who knows? Somebody may need me to build a shed or fix something. I mean, I gotta bring it. Overpackers. I got more stuff in here, but I won't. Some of it's very, like these shoes. I think I've worn these one time, just in case. You never know. This suitcase is still unput away from my last trip. I didn't actually it's still unpacked from my last trip. So you've got this suitcase. God tells you what you should bring and what you shouldn't bring. He's the only one that has been on this trip before. And God said, when you're like, hey God, should I bring my should I bring my skill saw? And God's like, no, please do not bring your skill saw. Don't do it. You're not going to make it through security. Please do not bring your skill saw. This is sin. Sin is like, you know what? I think I would have fun with my skill saw. I think it would be enjoyable for me to have a skill saw on that trip. Now, yes, God is the only person that's been there before, and sure, he knows what he's talking about, but what if something unexpected happens and I need the skill saw on my trip? God, I'm sorry, I hear you, but I'm going to go ahead and bring my skill saw. That's sin. That's what the Bible means when we talk about sin. That we are doing something that God has said, do not do that. Please do not do that. You're going to spend all your time in TSA if you do that. When we went on the mission trip a couple years ago, I wish Alex O'Lean was here because he was in charge of this crew. We had a couple kids. They're not in the room, so I can tell you about this story. But every single time, right before we went through security, they would fill up all the water bottles that they had. And every single time, security would pull them out and say, you can't have water bottles full. It was like on the way there, every leg of the trip, there and back. And Alex kept saying, please do not fill up your water bottles. And they're like, what if we get thirsty? Well, hey, listen, there will be water on the other side of security. You will be okay. And so sin is living out of sync with what God has said is actually good. Sin, at its core, is not trusting God enough to listen to what he's telling us about what is good. So what we do is, I don't know, we say, God, I know you said that I should follow your plan for sexuality, and I should follow your guidelines for purity and holiness. I know you said that, God, but what if I'm missing out on something? What if there's an opportunity and I see other people participating and they seem perfectly happy? I don't want to miss out on that. So God, I heard what you said, but I'm going to go ahead and do this thing that you said not to do. Do you see what we're getting at? That is sin. That is living out of sync. Now, God is not trying to ruin your life. He's trying to ensure that you have a great trip. He's the only one that's been there before. He's the only one qualified to define it. And so God says, don't do that. He's not saying don't do that because I don't want you to have any fun. He's saying don't do that because I need you to trust me because that's going to mess up your life. That's going to mess up your trip. That's what sin is. And it doesn't mean that, sometimes we get this idea that, I must be an awful person. But sometimes sin is well-intentioned. Sometimes we sin with good intentions, with good desires to see good outcomes. There's so many examples of that in the Bible. I'm going to set this over here. There's so many examples of people trying to figure out their own way. By the way, this goes all the way back to the very beginning. Adam and Eve and the fruit, and it looked good, and it was desirable. And I'll know good and evil? Well, what's the downside? God is trying to hide something from me, and God isn't. That's what sin is. Sin is living out of sync with what God has asked us to do. And so what happens is Peter, his illusion of self-confidence is stripped away. He sees Jesus. He catches a glimpse, just a glimpse, because he's not seeing Jesus fully yet. He catches a glimpse of who Jesus is, and he realizes, I have relied on my own ideas of good and evil for too long. And he catches this glimpse, and he says, you know what? There's no other proper response than to say, go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. I have lived by my own definitions of right and wrong. Alex Olean, I mentioned him just a second ago. They may be watching online. They're doing a little spring break traveling, which a lot of folks are. So if you're watching online, we appreciate that. But Alex was talking about growing up. He grew up in North Dakota, right outside of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, and it's this beautiful kind of Badlands vista. And he talked about going there when he was a kid and just sitting and taking it all in. And he got to bring his son Beckett there, and they're up at this vista, this overlook point, and they're just looking over the Badlands, and it's just this beautiful view. Just this beautiful, inspiring view. If you can imagine, if you've been to the Grand Canyon, you've been to the Rockies, you've been to the sunset on a beach, just this beautiful view. And he looks over at his son Beckett, and his son Beckett has stopped and is praying because he saw this incredible thing, and it made him realize there is more to the material world than what meets the eye. It is so true. It's such an honest response. Peter saw this catch of fish, a material thing, and it made him realize there is more to this world than meets the eye. Go away from me, for I am a sinful man. Even the material can reveal the supernatural. Here's weird move number 3, beige flag number 3. Jesus says, let's catch some people. So he does this strange thing again. Jesus doesn't leave Peter in this, I'm a sinful man, woe is me state. And by the way, this is such a danger when church talks about sin. I feel like, and maybe I'm just misremembering, or maybe this is, I don't know. But it feels like a lot of times when church talks about sin, we talk about sin, but not so much grace. Like we're heavy on the sin, or at least I felt like that growing up. It's heavy on the sin, and grace was like, well, yeah, I suppose maybe you can have a little grace. But you need to know about sin for grace to be amazing, and you need to know about grace for sin not to be paralyzing. Because if you don't hear about grace and you only hear about sin, then you have one of two responses. Either you're like constantly guilty, feeling terrible all the time, can't do anything, or you're like, well, I'm just going to dismiss that and not think about it and live my life. Those are the only two responses when we don't have the message of grace connected to the message of sin. So Jesus says in Luke chapter 5, verse 10, he said to Simon, do not fear. From now on, you will be catching people. Catching people? What? That's a strange idea. It's a strange phrase. And now it's Peter's turn to be strange again. This is weird move number 4, Luke chapter 5, verse 11. When they had brought their boats to land, they left everything. The big, huge pile of fish that they barely were able to get in the boat, they just left it. He had the greatest night of work in his life, and he walked away from it. Meaning that he was introduced to something even better. He had the most significant thing that had ever happened to him happen, and then he walked away from it. It's easy to quit a dead-end job. Do you think if your boss was handing you a check for your year's wages as a bonus, you could be like, you know what? I quit. I'm out. No. That would be very hard. What did Peter see that caused him to walk away from that? What did he see? He still decided to quit. Now, Peter, to me, is really, really relatable. He always is. He always has been in these stories. But in this particular story, he's really relatable because he is in this story. He's near Jesus. I'm sure he's tuned into Jesus, but he's not all in. He's not all in yet. He's near, but he's not all the way in. He's not anti-Jesus, but there's this hesitation, this maybe it's not skepticism, but it's just this tug of war between life and life with Christ. And then he has this powerful spiritual experience, and for a minute, everything's very clear. And he has 3 thoughts. Life is clearly more than fishing. Jesus is clearly more than a teacher. I'm not as good as I thought. And into that profound experience, Jesus says, here is your purpose now. Into what he just experienced. Here's your purpose. Your purpose is to help everyone take their next step closer to Jesus. Your purpose is to catch people. I wonder, go to the next slide if you would for me. And we're just going to wrap up with this question because it's time. Who is that one person in your life? Now, Peter was given this amazing responsibility. He would preach a sermon at the beginning of Acts and 3,000 people would get baptized. It's unbelievable. I don't know that anything's happened like it in the history of the world. Maybe, I don't know. But it's pretty cool that he got to do that. But maybe you have a person. Maybe it's not 3,000. That would be awesome. But maybe you have a person. This person could be a coworker. It could be a neighbor. It could be a friend. This person could be your toddler that you just suited up in their winter gear to go out and play in the snow. That could be your one, guiding that little soul into a relationship with Jesus. Who is your one? Here's what you cannot do. And here's what most of us, our instinct is to do. But we cannot do it. Our instinct is to say, oh no, I couldn't lead anybody to Jesus. I'm not good enough to teach anybody about Jesus. I don't have all the answers. And I think Jesus comes to us and says, hey, fear not. You are not the one carrying the burden. You are not the one lifting the load. I'm here to do it, but I'm going to use you and your unique relationships and your unique friendships and your unique perspective to do it. I'm going to be doing it, but I'm going to use you. Who is your one? This isn't just the church's mission. This wasn't just Peter's mission. This is your mission. It's thrilling to be part of that journey. Let's stand together, and we're going to ask our praise team to come up and sing us as we wrap up this morning. Who is your one?